welcome to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host, Avik, and as you all know, on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, we are dedicated to exploring the many facets of mental health and the well-being. So, today, I'm thrilled to have you join us today for an enlightening conversation that promises to inspire and to educate as well. So today's guest is someone who has dedicated his life to transforming the educational landscape. So with over 25 years of experience in the education, guess I'm talking about Leroy Slancy. So welcome to the show, Leroy.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Lovely, lovely. So Leroy, like before we start our conversation, I would love to mention this to all of our listeners quickly that uh, with 25 years of experience in the education, he has witnessed the profound changes and the challenges within our school systems. So he is the author of the impactful book, Emotional Schools, the Looming Mental Health Crisis, and a Pathway Through It. So, which addresses the crucial role of emotional intelligence and the mental health in the education. Yes. So he is not only an accomplished author, but also a seasoned facilitator of professional development sessions, a sought after keynote speaker, and a frequent podcast guest. So his insights and the personal anecdotes definitely provides us invaluable perspectives on the education, families, mental health, and the personal growth. So why to wait? Let's join us and welcome Leroy again onto the show. Welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that. You do me more justice than I deserve, I think, Avik, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. So, uh, so to start with, I mean, if you can share a bit about your journey in the education and what led you to focus on the emotional intelligence and the mental health.
Yeah, I think for me, early on as a teacher, I was really prone to forming relationships with students and staff because one thing that I learned very quickly as a new teacher was that if you want kids to be successful, you need to collaborate with your colleagues. And the best way to collaborate with your colleagues is to form relationships with your colleagues that aren't arduous or difficult or constrained. They have to be, calm and relaxed and pleasant. And it's the same thing with kids. The more you form relationships with kids, the more trust builds. And so early on, I naturally knew that relationships was the key to academic success. And that's kind of where it started for me as I, was able to have some of the toughest kids in my schools who struggled with academics, who struggled with their social emotional well-being, become successful because there was an inherent trust, there was a calmness. And this was early on before I even dove into emotional intelligence and all of those things that I wrote about in my book, because that was 25 years ago. But early on, I knew fair well that, relationships and a trusting relationship was key to success. And it proved it in my first couple of years with these kids who were struggling in other classrooms, became academically successful because they were grounded and their social emotional well-being was taken care of before it became a big buzzword and, a huge topic of conversation out there. So that's where it started for me. And then it just sort of progressed after that to a point where society shifted, with technology and both parents having to work and all of these demands on life that have caused a strain on parenting and attachment bonds and families and all that, which is then inherently translated into behavior that's challenging in schools, which is the title of my book is Emotional Schools, and that's it comes down to the fact that schools are becoming more and more emotional because kids and adults struggle with coping because of that emotional intelligence piece hasn't developed properly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay. Also, here, like what inspired you about your book, which is Emotional Schools, the Looming Mental Health Crisis and a Pathway Through It. So, if you can share.
Yeah, so the inspiration came from basically me feeling sorry for my teachers, me feeling sorry for my kids. I got a heart that's like this big, and sometimes it's hard not to take what's going on in schools home with you. And what I found in the last 10 or so years is more and more kids struggling with their emotions, and they're unable to cope, and they're just not being successful academically. And on the flip side with that, because behaviors have increased, because the supports in the education system aren't keeping up with the changes in society, teachers are burning out, and teachers are losing the profession. So, that's truly what inspired me to move forward, was to write a book about what's actually going on in schools, and to outline just how much growth there is in mental health concerns, from anxiety to depression to eating disorders to mood disorders to, you name it. It's growing exponentially in schools, and teachers don't get the training for it, and kids aren't learning how to cope early on. And because of that, I felt this calling to first identify what's going on in schools, provide data. Like, the book is research based, plus it's experience based. So it's based on 25 years experience. It's based on being a father, and it's based on research around emotional intelligence and social emotional learning. And so the book I was truly inspired to write a book to talk about, what's going on, but to provide a pathway, to provide answers, to provide strategies for parents, for teachers, for school districts, for principals, for leaders. Because I've been in a leadership position for the last, 16, 17 years, I think. Actually, longer than that now. I forget how old I am. I only was a teacher for 6 or 7 years before I became an administrator. And, and it starts with your administrative leadership to make those changes, to help teachers grow, and to provide that professional development and stuff, so you can make the changes. But that's truly the inspiration, was me just needing to do something for educators and for kids. And hopefully, tug on the heartstrings of the people who control the dollars and control the management and control that piece, right? And not just to say, hey, here's a problem, because I could have easily written a book about how emotional schools were, could have threw out lots of data on behavior and mental health concerns, but that would serve no purpose except for identifying an issue. And so I wanted to identify the issue, but provide a pathway through it, provide strategies, provide some structure. And so that was the key, is that I want to help, even like, I know I actually get a lot of teachers from India applying for jobs over here in Canada, and I think your listeners out there, if they're teachers and whatnot, if they want to know about our system and be able to want to apply for jobs and step in, read my book, download the ebook. I think it's like $5 or something, not even, you don't have to buy the paper copy, but it's a good tool, and it's a good educational resource for people getting into the profession, so they can step in and be like, okay, I'm on board. I know what's going on, right?
Exactly. So, if you can highlight like any key points from your book that believe, that you believe are essentials for the educators and the parents to understand.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and I can't remember which chapter it is. So once I get past the societal shifts and all those changes, I really dive into emotions. And I think the biggest thing is that, we can't ignore what specific emotions are. We need to be able to have teachers and kids label what anger is, what frustration is, what shame is, what embarrassment is, what jealousy is, what joy is, what happiness is. And the sooner people can first identify what an emotion is and understand what fear brings to the table, or what being upset brings to the table, or what being silly brings to the table in terms of those emotions, at that point, once you can label it, then you can teach to that emotion, and you can help a kid or a parent soothe through that particular emotion. So when you get into the middle of my book, I talk about labeling emotions. I talk about the family emotions, and I talk about the importance of that. But I also tie it into the physiology attached to it. So our body it's called a polyvagal nerve that runs through our veins, through our fingers and whatnot, and it attaches to our prefrontal cortex, and and whatnot. And every interaction that we have as a human, whether it's through a conversation or, you know, stubbing your toe, or somebody not being kind to you, or somebody honking their horn or whatnot, you know, or something happy, somebody brings you a flower, we naturally have a physiological response in our body. That's science. And so after I, you know, I dive into the part around labeling emotions, I talk about the science of emotions. I talk about the physiology, because it is a science. And then I talk about how the polyvagal nerve, or the vagus nerve in our body, needs to be soothed. It has to be calmed in order for us to be able to handle a stressful situation. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I would push on parents and teachers and leaders out there, is that you really need to understand the science of emotions. But to understand the science of emotions, you need to be able to label and understand the emotions, and so do kids. And then from there, once you understand the physiology, then you talk strategies, you talk breathing strategies, you talk meditation strategies, you talk mindful strategies, and you teach it in school. And you teach it early and you teach it often, but you don't add it on. You don't do a class around it. You teach it whenever you can. Whenever somebody's being emotional, identify the emotion. Talk about, okay, let's take some deep breaths and calm. Because I wrote a second book. It's called And Breathe. And it's a book that has 50 breathing strategies, diverse breathing strategies for kids, parents, and teachers to use, because it all goes hand in hand. Labeling emotions, understanding emotions, the science of emotions, and then learning how to calm and soothe your emotions. Because if you can't calm and soothe your emotions, guess what? You're going to make some poor decisions. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to do the wrong thing, because I'm sure you've done it. You've been angry, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, oops, did that just come out of my mouth? Right? And so that's the whole point, right? Is to be able to get through that piece. And then, you know, so that's the probably the nucleus and the crux of what I talk about in my book. And then after I, you know, talk about the societal shifts, as I talk about the science of emotions and mindfulness and whatnot, then I talk about the programs, and I talk about the strategies that you can use to embed it in your classrooms or your schools or your homes, because you can't just say, do this, do that, you shouldn't, without providing practical strategies. And that's the other piece to the book. And that's how it kind of concludes, is with practical strategies, right down to how you structure your school.
Lovely. So, I mean, for the emotional intelligence, how do you define it? I mean, and also at the same time, why is it so crucial in the education system?
Well, emotional intelligence is quite simple. You know, number one, I think whenever you go anywhere, you know, so for example, you said it's 10 o'clock at night for you over there in India, right? It's 10 in the morning here. You've had a full day. My guess is you're probably a little bit tired, unless you're a night owl and you're going to stay up all night. But you've probably had a full day where you've had 30 or 40 interactions, right? So my job in terms of being emotionally intelligent is, as I show up on this podcast, is right away I'm going to be aware that you've been up all day and you've could have had some great things happen, some bad things happen, or you've just had a really boring day. And so I need to be sensitive to the fact that maybe you've had some traumatic events today, or you've had some in the past, or, you know, unless you're living utopia over there and your life is just brilliant and happy all the time. But the biggest thing with being emotionally intelligent is, first of all, keeping yourself grounded and calm, but also understanding the person that you're about to encounter could be coming and showing up to the table with emotions of their own. And when people show up with emotions of their own, if you come in and you're aggressive, or you're overly happy, or, you know, you've met those people who it's like they ate sunshine for breakfast, and it's like, holy man, you take it back a notch, right? And so it's the same thing. And so you have to be, when you're emotionally intelligent, you're somebody who can keep this sense of calm about your own core by soothing yourself when you enter into conversations or interactions with other people. And then when you have people come to you and they present themselves with their own emotions, it's how you respond to their emotions. And that's what it means being emotionally intelligent, is being aware of yourself, being personally aware, and being socially aware. And, I've been in a lot of business meetings. I do, like I said, I do workshops and professional development and keynote speaking and things like that. And I do parent coaching. And, it's when I do parenting coaching and I do leadership coaching and teaching coaching, they are very emotional conversations I have when I meet with parents and teachers and principals, because they're in this emotional environment. And if I approach those meetings without emotional intelligence, I'm not going to get anywhere with helping them resolve the problems that they're having in their homes or their classrooms or in their schools. And that's the key, is just maintaining a sense of balance and understanding that someone else may not be able to maintain a sense of balance. And your goal is to be emotionally intelligent enough to understand that.
That's so lovely said, yeah. And I mean, what strategies or the practices can teachers implement to foster that emotional intelligence in their classrooms?
Well, I think, it's there's something called a teachable moment, and we're taught this early on. Even as growing up, you think about your parents, and when you're little, and you're doing something, and all of a sudden your parents, you do something and they teach you. They get into a mode of they're gonna teach you something, right? And so when you get into education, we ride on that. Like, we plan and prep for lessons, and we're going to do an English lesson on this or a social studies lesson on that. But there's always those times where kids' curiosity or their behavior is going to provide a teachable moment. And the key strategy that I would suggest to parents and teachers and administrators, besides, some big structural changes, is to make sure that you grab those teachable moments. So when you have a kid who's melting down or showing some frustration, use those words. It feels like you're frustrated. I can tell you what frustration feels like for me. It feels like my chest tightens up, my stomach hurts, and I want to clench my fist. But you know what I do? I take some deep breaths. Do you want to breathe with me, little guy? And you take some deep breaths and you work through it, and then you move on. You don't throw in discipline at that point because they're melting down, because anytime you deal with poor behavior, it's a sign of communication, right? And so for teachers and parents, you need to grab onto those teachable moments when you can teach to the emotion, when you can teach to the self-soothing piece, and you've got to be able to do that. And, I go back to when kids were babies and couldn't speak, and they all of a sudden they started crying or having temper tantrums. It was either, you, as a parent, you went, okay, got to change their diaper, you got to feed them, or they need to sleep. And then, we get to this place where kids, all of a sudden, they develop an oral language. And all of a sudden, we think they're going to be able to communicate what's wrong with them. But kids at 5, 6, even teenagers, even adults, when they feel emotions, they can't communicate that. And so the goal is, in the micro, aspect of being in a school or at home, is to grab those teachable moments and work through it with them. Now, on a bigger scale, you want to be able to structure your school so that you organize and you implement these social emotional learning competencies around communication, around personal and social awareness, and critical thinking and creative thinking. And you want to embed those into what you do in your classrooms. One of the things that I do is I in all the schools I go to is I use a program out of Australia called Play is the Way. It's a phenomenal program, and you use play to elicit emotion so you could teach kids to soothe and teach adults to soothe. Because, one of the things that is missing from our society is just play. Kids aren't playing as much as they are. So when I talk about organization and structure of school, so for example, at my school, I have 2 recesses and 1 lunch hour. Typically, traditionally, there's 1 recess and 1 lunch hour, but I incorporate more of that because kids are, a lot of times, they're behind gaming systems or behind technology. And when they play, that's when they learn to develop relationships and interact and work on those emotions and feel those emotions. So I incorporate that into my school. I bring in a program that's a Play is the Way program that embeds into everything that we do. And so it's not an add-on for teachers, because anytime you add on for teachers, it'll fall by the wayside. So, simple structures like that, adding another recess, bringing in a social emotional learning program like Play is the Way, and just making sure that all of the teachers, like I'm in an elementary school right now, but I've also implemented it in a high school, make sure that all of the teachers are trained in social emotional well-being. and that's where, a guy like me comes in and does professional development with schools or with teachers, or if I do the coaching with, that's where I start, because, a lot of times you'll have these educators and they'll dive into things like assessment and class management, and then they'll pro D like that. But at the end of the day, learning's not going to happen unless you have kids who are able to manage their emotions and have some emotional intelligence. And that's when they're most successful. That's when all of a sudden curriculum, assessment, and those things come into play, but you have to develop that first, and you have to maintain it. And you think of kids who are at the senior levels in high school who get huge test anxiety, and because they want to get into university in some of these programs, if they can't soothe and calm their emotions, they're not gonna do as well as they should on those major exams that they're competing with, these kids who are getting 93s, 94s in school. And so it all comes down to just that ability to be emotionally, stable.
Understood.
Hmm.
So, how do you envision the future of education with the greater emphasis on the emotional intelligence and the mental health?
Well, I'm hoping it's people like me, other educators, because the big reason why educators are leaving, besides the money and the funding and the funding supports the programs in schools, and and there's these standardized tests that they throw at us. But I'm hoping that my book, people like me, other leaders like me, other teachers, are going to start bringing more of a spotlight onto behavior and what's going on in schools, because the more we can put a spotlight on it, the more schools will bring in social emotional learning programs into their school. And it does happen, but they're just little tokens here or there, right? There's a lot of times they use reward systems and whatnot, but it's not intrinsic, right? And so my hope is that, with my book, with going on these podcasts, hopefully, even in India, I would fly to India in a heartbeat if teachers or schools wanted me to come over to train their staff and whatnot. Like, I have no problem going anywhere. My hope is that, in 10 years, people like me and myself will start transforming the educational system so emotional intelligence becomes a big part of what we do every single day. And, I'm lucky because in British Columbia, Canada, we do teach to competencies. We teach these core competencies around creative thinking, critical thinking, personal social awareness. Character matters on top of the curricular content like math, social science, and that sort of stuff, right? So, that's what I hope. I hope that more and more schools will get to that place where they realize without social emotional learning, the academic success will not come as easily as it should.
It's lovely. Lovely. So, if there's one message you want listeners to take away from this discussion, what would be?
To really, really dive into your personal awareness, to yourself, self-realize, self-actualize, reflect, stop pointing the finger and blaming everyone else, because you know what? We can play the blame game all day, every day. We can wake up in the morning and we can blame the fact that it was too hot out or too cold out or too whatever, and there's always going to be something to blame. But if we can turn around and reflect and figure out how we can keep our emotions in check so that we can stay calm and make the difference with ourselves, to be responsible for our own happiness and not let our happiness be determined by someone else, then we'll change the world. And I think that's why things like self-soothing, meditation, being mindful, those things are so important. And it's important that we teach that to kids very early and very often, because nowadays it's just not happening as much because parents aren't at home anymore because they have to work. Society has shifted, and because parents are not at home, because normally mom's the one who's at home back in the day, or if a mom was working, dad was at home, but that's disappearing. And so my hope is that everybody will take the time to be self-aware, to be socially aware, and try to make those changes early on for their kids and for themselves. It'll help change the world one by one.
No, that's lovely. That's very, very lovely. Yeah. Great. So thank you so much for joining us, Leroy, today and sharing your insights, because these are very important to understand. And that is the main reason Healthy Mind and Healthy Life is creating this awareness among everyone. So thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your insights. And dear listeners, I believe all of you have gained valuable insights from today's episode, and gonna definitely resonate with the discussions happened with Leroy. So until next time, take care, stay healthy, and be happy. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.